Good evening, everyone. Once again, I'm Rakhi Gautam from Great HR, your moderator for the session today. I welcome you all today to our 60th Ask the Expert webinar, Parichay. The topic for today is building a robust succession planning framework, best practices and strategies for organizations. Now, before I dive into the topic, let's do a little housekeeping on how the session goes. So the session is divided into two parts. The first part will be the discussion with our expert today, which will then be followed by an audience Q&A. So the audience Q&A is where time is all yours, dear attendees. You can put across your questions and we will take them up towards the end. Also, the session is currently being recorded. So if you happen to miss out on anything, do not worry at all. We have got you covered. We will share the recording with you once it is done. And also, this recording will be available on our official Great HR YouTube channel. So you can always go back and watch the session there. Now, without any further delay, let's start the session. Succession planning is crucial for organizational sustainability. In this dynamic session, we will delve into a comprehensive approach to identifying and developing talent within your company. We'll discover the latest strategies to mitigate talent gaps, ensure seamless transitions, and maintain operational continuity. Our expert today, Mr. Babu Vittal, Head People and HR Practices at RTP Global, will help us master the art of preparing the workforce for the future, cultivating leadership from within, and achieving enduring success. Now, before we start with the questions, I will take you all through quickly with Mr. Babu Vittal's profile. He's the part of RTP Global and heads people and HR practices. He works with portfolio companies and helps them with HR strategy, building organizations, and nurturing talent. Prior to RTP, he was part of the leadership team at ULA, a Jakarta-based B2B organization. He also worked with Vedantu, an EdTech unicorn, and was earlier Vice President Human Resources with ShopClues, an e-commerce platform. He was one of the early HR leaders of Flipkart. He is also an Acceleri alumni and did his design thinking at Stanford School. I think we have gotten the perfect person with us today to discuss on this topic. Once again, I welcome you, Mr. Babu, and we are very excited for the session today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Great. So let's start with the discussion. We'll want to start with the basics. So when we talk about succession planning, what do you think are the essential components of a well-rounded succession plan?
Okay, interesting. Thanks, Raki. Thanks, everyone, for participating in this session. Let's keep it interactive. I'll try and share what I know. It's not that we know everything. Let's keep exchanging ideas. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot. Before we start, I just want to ask a quick question. How many of you are taking this webinar from office and how many of you are taking it from home? You can quickly message it on the chat. We'll know that where are you taking this call from?
Yes. You have the Q&A option enabled in your system. You can just write work from WFH or office. Okay, I see a lot of people are working out of office. Great. This is truly an hybrid situation.
Okay. I'm sure then you would have told folks in your office that you're going to talk about and learn about succession planning. Don't overcome it. So we'll try and learn mutually. So I'm just going back to the question what you asked, Raki. The essential components in my mind about a well-rounded succession plan, it starts by asking a few tough questions to ourselves. The first question is, do we actually need succession planning in our organization? I mean, it's a fancy word. It's very, very useful to have it in our resume when we look for the next opportunity. It gives us a lot of scope for discussion in the interview process. Let's just be clear whether we need succession planning or not. That's the first question one need to ask, right? moving further, if you have the right answer from there, I would say start by asking what is the role you are thinking about, right? Succession planning can be done for multiple roles. Generally, there is a myth that it's only done for the CEO. It can be done for multiple roles. As long as there is depth, it can cater to any particular vertical, horizontal, or the role. So the first question to be clear is, are you really serious? Do you need this in your organization? The next one I would say that is, what role are you thinking about, right? When you go down the rabbit hole on thinking about the role, be very specific, right? I mean, the specificity matters when you start thinking about succession planning. So that's the third one I would say. And when you start thinking about it, there is some form of information already available with you in any organization. Let's go and look at the key capabilities of that specific role, right? I'm not too sure whether all of us have the habit of documenting job descriptions. If we have that, that's a good place to start. Go to a JD about that specific role, pick up and understand what are the key capabilities. Let's say you don't have a job description. The best way is to just sit and think about what this individual, what the role holder is currently doing on a daily basis, right? That would give you some insights in terms of what's happening. So that's another one which you need to look at. I'm just trying to give a broader picture on succession planning in terms of where do you start. When you're clear on where you start, then all components fall into picture. The next one I would move into is also look at the talent pipeline you have in place, right? Let's say if there is just one person you have in the organization, which probably, let's say, head of strategy in the organization, and there are no team members, it's an IC role somebody is playing, it becomes very difficult for you to figure out a talent pipeline for that specific role. So you need to look at what is the talent pipeline you have for any role you're thinking about creating a succession planning. You could look at the existing folks. What are the number of people who are available in the team? Look at seniority if you want to. Look at the kind of gaps, what they have in place. And it could also be about an individual you're looking about, right? So these are some of the things when you put together becomes the component of a successful succession planning. There's just one last thing which is super critical. It's also about development planning, right? How do you develop this individual in his or her career? That is something you may need to have in place to ensure that succession planning is complete. When I talk about development planning, don't worry if you don't have it in place. The simplest place to look for is your performance reviews. Once the reviews are done, you would obviously think about giving feedback to an individual. That feedback is development planning. When you're really interested about growing somebody in your organization, that feedback matters. If it is in a structured way, we call it development planning. If it's not structured, we call it just feedback, right? So all of these things put together, which is about, do you really need to do it? What is the role you're thinking about? Is there an individual you have in mind for that specific role? Is there a talent pipeline for the role? And do you have a development plan in place? More or less, these are the components of a good succession plan.
Thank you, Mr. Babu. I think you have given us, a start to establish and, to take notes from. Okay, this is something which is required. We often talk about, and as you rightly mentioned, it's a very fancy word, succession planning these days. In the era of war of talent, succession planning is just, taking the heights. So when we say it's succession planning, we have to be very, clear with our understanding of requirements. What is our objective right now? Do we need this or not? There has to be, that question that we ask ourselves before we go into any kind of, steps for execution and planning. Also, you talked about skills that are there. Skills are very important. And I think one factor which we often might not connect with succession planning is your performance feedback that you talked about. That if you are trying to identify a talent within your organization and you already have his or her performance feedback in front of you with all, it's a very statistical report. If you have, it really helps you understand if she or he is the right person or not, and how then further you can develop them. And then there's L&D that also comes in picture. So it's a very close net, but then has a lot of different nuances to it. So thank you so much, Mr. Babu, for setting the context when it comes to succession planning. Now moving to my next question, which is, as we talked about, succession planning often involves identifying potential leaders early on. So could you share some innovative strategies, ways, methods for our audience today to spot hidden leadership talents within their organization?
It's very difficult to spot. So that's the easy answer. Of course, there are a few ways in which we can give it a try, right? One of the things is see if you can integrate this in your interview process. Right? Of course, it starts with the talent pool which is available in the organization, but often as HR professionals, as leadership team members, there's tons of data which is available in front of us. We tend to ignore the data what we have in front of us. Most important data is the interview notes, right? Generally, you have a debrief after an interview session. So if you go back and look at the interview notes, you will understand a few aspects about an individual. So that's probably the first place to start. Because we ignore, that becomes a talent rusher. That's probably the first place to start. There are a few signs. It's not completely objective. It starts being subjective, but more and more data you put in place, then the objectivity starts coming into the picture. Excuse me. So it's obviously an insider. We are looking for an insider who's currently either making decisions for the organization or in the process of helping the decision maker, right? So that's one of the traits we need to be looking for. I'm not saying the favorite, right? So there is a difference between a favorite and an insider. A favorite is a blue-eyed boy or a girl where the entire organization look forward to that individual. I'm talking about an insider who could be an introvert, could be an extrovert, but who is helping in the process of making decisions. So that's one of the areas where we could look at. Look for someone who exhibits the understanding of the organization, the understanding of the ecosystem. Let's say we are thinking about someone in, say, software development space, if that is your organization. You don't look at someone who is great at understanding your product alone. Look for someone who understands the entire ecosystem, how the markets operate. In conversations, you'll be able to figure out. So conversation with an individual, if it is not just about the product in which you're working, but it's also about the entire ecosystem, probably that's a hidden talent within the organization. Easier things to spot, some things like if he or she is a people's person. Do you see them talk about, fight for, engage in deeper conversations about people, right? A sort of a talent magnet is what I would call it. When the person is there, there is always a group around. When the person talks, there is always apt silence in terms of listening. When he makes a point, when she makes a point, there's a lot of heads nodding in, right? So look for someone who is a talent magnet in the organization. Now, all of this are slightly subjective. It's kind of difficult because it makes your job tougher. You need to have your eyes and ears open. You need to understand what's happening in your organization. You may not be able to cover the length and breadth of your organization if the org is super big, right? But give it a try. These are largely subjective. There are a couple of objective things you could look at. Superb stellar performance growth. If that individual has been performing, you have, let's say, a performance review rating of 1 to 5, and the individual has always been clocking 4.5, 4, 5. We like giving performance review ratings in not just in numerics, but also decimal, right? 4.5, 4.6, 4.7. So look for individuals who are super performers consistently, right? That's one objective way of looking at hidden talent. Another one you can look at is Look for someone who has done different roles within the organization, who is super willing to step out of their comfort zone, who has extended when there is a need for the organization, who has picked up a problematic area and tried solving for the organization. Maybe the person failed, but nevertheless, look for someone who has done or juggled different roles within the organization. There's a small caveat or a catch here. When you look for such individuals, I'm not talking about an engineering manager doing a senior engineering manager job. No, that's a slight extension of the work what he or she has been doing. I'm looking for an engineering manager who has also done a product role, probably did a design role, and probably a strategy role, right? It's not possible for one individual to do all of these jobs, but have they tried? Have they tried juggling some of the responsibilities? So combination of subjective and objective measures could probably help you to identify potential leaders. It's it's not math, it's not science, it's not just art, it's a combination of all of this together. That's
Thank
what
you,
I
Mr.
can say.
Babu. Thank you. I was actually taking notes when you were talking about it because it is very important. We often, we don't realize uh, how much value it holds, because it's like, okay, there's this person who's working really well. I know that she or he could be a potential leader one day. But when it actually comes to, scrutinizing and going through the previous reports, you often find a lot of different perspectives coming in. So I hope the audience has also taken notes, as did I, that somebody who's involved in, strategy planning, who understands the ecosystem, not just his profile or her profile, but also have taken different roles and responsibilities, understands, the company's culture, uh, values that, and helps, you talked about magnet, somebody who's willing to have those deeper conversations, who's not afraid to be put in an uncomfortable spot, but want to, learn more and help in whichever way they can. So definitely, I feel like everybody would agree when we when we talk about these skills, that these are the skills of a leader. So if you have those skills, I mean, you could be, the next leader in line for your organization. So thank you, Mr. Babu, for that. Moving ahead and taking one step forward, talking about the war for talent. We just discussed briefly about it in our, the start of this webinar. So how can a strategic succession plan help organizations stay competitive in this talent-driven workplace today?
You've decided to ask tough questions. So before I try and answer the question, I just want to ask a quick question to folks who are listening in. I'm trying to keep it simple, practical, not trying to get into larger frameworks because everything is available online. Is this line of conversation okay, or do you want me to shift gears? You can just say yes or no in Q&A.
And yes or no in the chat. We can see responses. I think yes, a lot of yes coming in.
Okay, please continue. Thank you. Fine. I'll just move on. You asked about staying competitive, right? Interesting. So I'll try and make a small difference. Succession planning is different from a replacement planning, right? That's our day job. Replacement planning is our day job. When somebody leaves, you never know when someone stops thinking about continuing to work in the organization. They could leave at any point in time. Most of our employment contracts are at will. Somebody decides to leave, gives notice period, doesn't give, that's fine. That's a day job. We need to fight it out, find somebody, replace them. So let's be very clear. It's not about replacing someone. It's about building in a pipeline, building in a trajectory, showing somebody that this is how he or she could grow in the organization. So that's the first one. If you were to stay competitive, when somebody leaves, we immediately go find someone, hire, and replace the individual. Let's not think that we have done the right one there. It's also not doing justice to people who are currently within the organization. It's not definitely not about replacing someone immediately. So the one strategic advantage you have is if you could drive the message that it is long term. The more you drive this message across all employees that it's long term, because we get you as a manager get multiple opportunities to interact with an employee, with a key employee, right? There are scheduled opportunities, unscheduled opportunities. What are scheduled opportunities? Performance review conversations. If that happen once a year, twice a year, or every quarter, if it's a sales team, many organizations do it on once a quarter. Those are opportunities for you to talk to your own employees and tell them you are in for it for a long time. It's a long-term game, right? So those are scheduled opportunities. There are manager one-on-one conversations which happen in most places on regular frequency. So that's another place we can communicate. So the key to keep it competitive within your organization is to let others know. Let people know that it is long term. So that's one. The second is succession planning is not an HR thing, right? Yeah, end of the day, we'll have to own it, right? Everybody will push it to us. We need to own it, but it's not a HR thing. If you could see how you could align, make the marriage between succession planning and business goals, that's super critical. If that is made visible, nothing more competitive than letting people know that I am growing you because XYZ business vertical is growing. This is where both will merge. If we could communicate that these both would merge at some point in time, and it's not built as a silo, it's been built in parallel to help individuals. It works wonders. Lastly, first we spoke about how letting people know that it has to be a long-term one. Second, we spoke about aligning succession plan with business goals. The last one is there is obviously an important meeting for every organization which happens on a regular basis. Could be anything, could be the leadership team meeting. If there are investors in your organization, it's a board meeting. Even otherwise, if it's a public sector organization, there is a board meeting which happens. In any organization, there's one meeting which is super critical for everybody, where your CEO starts preparing 10 days, 20 days in advance. There is a team putting things together. You know that meeting is super critical. Ensure succession planning is spoken about in that meeting. If it's spoken about in that meeting, I mean, I don't want to ask too much. I don't want to say that should be the first slide in the meeting, but at least if it appears as a slide in a board meeting or that one most important meeting, done. Everyone understands that it is super competitive. Let's look at an example. I'm an employee. If three things happen to me, the first thing is my manager repeatedly says, this is a long-term thing. You're in for a long-term gain. Well, it works for me. Second, I see that my succession plan is aligned with business goals. I'm happy. Third, I see that it's spoken about in board meeting, right? Because anything spoken in board meeting spills over in the next all hands. There is an update. Everybody talks about what happened in the board meeting. So if these three are in place, it gives you a competitive advantage. You don't need to put up posters. You don't need to drive the agenda. You don't need to run separate meetings to tell people how competitive it is in our landscape. It's more than enough. So that's what I would suggest.
Thank you so much, Mr. Babu. You have actually concluded it also for us. And yes, truly, when it comes to succession planning, there could be plans for it, right? But I might not know about it, and XYZ employee might not know about it. So it's also important, with these meetings, official meetings that happen, we talk about this. So if I want to grow in my career, or I might be feeling that, this job right now for me feels very stagnant and I'm stuck, I might start looking out. But if I get to know, okay, there's a long-term opportunity here, people, there are things, processes set in place, and I could explore more. I would also start putting in more efforts. I would feel more encouraged. My employee, at the end of the day, I'll also have a better employee experience. So I think everything is very interconnected when we talk about succession planning. So thank you so much, Mr. Babu, for that. Moving on to my next question. We hear about succession planning, in larger organizations, in corporations. It's a very heard term there. But when it comes to smaller organizations, in SMEs, do you think there is scope for that? And if yes, how can smaller businesses also implement effective succession strategies without overwhelming the resources, because it's already a close-knit group?
Interesting. I mean, it's important everywhere. We see it in our families also. So it's super critical, however big, small an organization is. But the way we need to look at it in smaller organizations is it's difficult to convince our boss, the CEO, but we should be able to convince our boss that this is super critical. If we can ensure that the message is communicated, that it's an investment we are making for future, right? Earlier we spoke about replacement planning. There are few areas, if you invest correctly, we don't have to worry about talent leaving the organization. We can start trusting the process instead of the individual. So it's an investment. This message need to be communicated to the CEO. He or she need to be convinced also. So that's probably irrespective of the size of the organization. It matters a lot for smaller organizations and SMEs. So it's better we start communicating about this. That's one. Second, I would say let's not make it super fancy, super attractive. Let's not spend so much energy in smaller organizations talking about it, because in smaller organizations, if you disturb the rhythm of functioning of an organization, it ends up rocking the boat. You don't want to rock the boat, right? So keep it very, very simple. Look at the fundamental principles of what is succession planning and keep it super simple so that you don't end up rocking the boat. But the biggest advantage in smaller organizations is you can distribute something like succession planning across the organization. Not just for one role, it can be done for multiple roles. It can be done at function level also. Sorry about that. So what I would recommend is distribute the knowledge about succession planning across the organization. In smaller organizations, much more potential, because what happens in smaller organizations is, I'm going back to the previous discussion we had in terms of ensuring that somebody gets the opportunity to play different roles, right? So if you percolate this information across smaller organizations, you will start developing a lot of willingness within the company to pick up alternate roles and start performing on it, right? You have very less hands, but you have a lot more to be achieved. That's how smaller organizations operate. So if you could percolate the message and distribute the knowledge about succession planning across the organization, that really works. So what I would say is, it's an investment. See if you can communicate and convince the CEO. It starts from there. I would also say if you can keep it simple without rocking the boat, that would be really useful. And tell everyone in the world, at least in your organization, that succession planning is something super critical. Also, it gives you an opportunity to find out, is there someone ready to take up the role, right? So that will be super visible. All that we have spoken so far, if you are a smaller organization, 30, 40, 60, 80 employees, you as an HR person gets complete visibility on what's happening across the org. That also gives you a huge advantage. I think most of the time succession planning may not be in the full form, but in some way or the other works beautifully well in smaller organizations.
Thank you, Mr. Babu, for that. I mean, all of us would agree with everything that you've just shared. And it's important at the end of the day that communication is being done. We could plan for all that matter, but if you're not able to communicate that effectively, forget about the execution of it. Thank you for sharing that. I'm just going to take a step back. We discussed about this, and I have a question popping up. We talked about how it is important that we integrate and there's synergy between the succession planning objective and the business goal at large. So every organizations have their own culture. It's unique to every organization. So how can a tailored succession plan align with the company's culture and values while also fostering leadership growth?
Okay. Culture. Okay. In my personal view, culture is something most people, if you're HR professionals in this webinar, you'll not agree with me because we always like to say that we are the culture proponent in the organization. Let's be clear, if it's a startup or if it's an SME, if it's a relatively smaller size organization, it's the group of founders and leaders who decide the culture of the organization. And it grows from there, right? From the day they started, an individual's values and culture is what gets reflected as the organization's value and culture. So that's something which is decided, done, dusted. It's existing in the org. I don't think we will be able to go and create culture because this problem, I see it as two-sided problem. One side of the problem is culture and values. The second side of the problem statement is aligning your succession plan with culture and values of the organization. Right? So I'm talking about one side of it. Again, going back to the same principle, don't rock the boat, right? Somebody has created culture. You interviewed for the job, you like the people, you join the organization, which also means you like the culture and values of this organization. You've taken up this role. So be happy about the existing culture and values. If you want to change something there, you could probably reword it in a way it makes you happy, right? Your boss is definitely not going to be happy, but still, if you need some satisfaction, you can reword it. So that's something which is etched on stone. It's not going to change. Now we are looking at succession plan and how could we align this with culture and values. Succession plan is not something on paper. It's not a document. It's not an email which lies in many inboxes. It's about an individual, right? It's about a bunch of individuals in the organization who we want them to be successful in what they are doing and keep contributing for the organization, right? Not every individual is going to be the same. Everyone brings in different values, our own personal values we bring into the organization. We look at what's happening in the company and try and mimic what's existing in the company. But the bunch of individuals bring in their own values and culture. When you are taking them through a succession plan process, and when you see the alignment with org values and culture is sort of missing, it's okay. It's okay. There will be a mismatch. What you need to do is you need to give time. You need to give time for them to make some changes. You need to give them time for them to scale up the way on which they are currently operating. We should go back to what we discussed in the beginning. Communication is super key. So we just need to tell them about how the alignment is missing. How could they come closer? Not just telling them, helping them with some tools. Like you could be one of the tools who could help them in the journey to make this transition. So the alignment for sure when you start will not be there. The understanding is that you cannot change the company's culture and values. Another understanding is that individuals make up the succession plan. And when they come on board, there will be some gaps. The only thing is succession plan is super long term, right? It's not today, tomorrow, it's not replacement, it is succession. So I would suggest what we need to do is give them some time, give them some help, work with them and help them overcome it. Over a period of time, the alignment will come. This is one area where most of us fail because from the beginning, we say that there's no alignment, so let's drop it. That's not the case. I think if we can work on this further, we can start moving two pillars together. That's what I would say.
think I can say this for all when it comes to planning or starting a new project and initiative, we get very excited, super excited to do new things, and on with that excitement level, our patient level goes down. So we can't be patient, right? We want to do things. So even if something that might not work out in the starting, there is some sort of friction, we are not able to integrate better, we start feeling dejected and we're like, okay, this isn't working, let's stop this. But I think what I gathered from here is we have to be patient. We have to understand that, as you said, culture cannot be changed. So we have to think of ways in which we can integrate it better and come up with better strategies. And obviously it would have a lot of setbacks and we'll get just learnings out of it. Thank you, Mr. Babu, for that. I see we are daring. We are already at 4:37. If you have any questions, please start putting them across in the Q&A option that you can see in the Zoom control panel, and we will take them up just after a couple of questions that I have from my end, and we'll then take your questions. So you can start putting your questions now. Okay, so moving to my next question that I had. We talk about change and it's constant. Change is the only constant, we often say. And industries can evolve rapidly. I mean, 4 years before, there wasn't anything like hybrid or work from home for a lot of majority organizations. For a few, yes, there were some policies in place, but now after the pandemic, we have seen digitization. We have seen how technology has changed the way we work today. There's immense transformation, and with that there are a lot of new things that we are now adapting. But when it comes to succession planning, how can it be designed to account for emerging roles and skill sets that may not even exist today, like something which is not there, but how can we prepare for it when it comes to succession plan?
You cannot. That's the straightforward, simple answer. Let me give it a try. I mean, it's an investment, right? As we have seen so far, it's an investment what you make. In most of the cases, it's an investment you make on the faith you have in the way your business will grow and the faith you have on the individual. And then we find some process to marry these faiths together. We ensure that the right skills are given to the individual and we progress further. One of the interesting things I've seen in the way for the last 10 odd years, I worked in the startup ecosystem. One of the interesting things I've seen in this ecosystem is pivoting, right? I've seen organization constantly pivot from what they originally started for. And so they probably started with doing something totally different. And when you look at them today, we end up doing completely different things. So that's how I've seen many successful organizations. So pivoting becomes a much discussed term and much utilized. The way in which they have grown is astonishing. When I go back and look at the reasons for pivoting, right? It could be market change. It could be certain dynamics. It could be something coming in from somewhere else. Those are second, third, and fourth reason. The first reason is most probably an individual, either in the leadership team or in the decision-making level, starts figuring out an opportunity about the future and tries bringing that concept into the organization. So the inducement of pivot or change comes from an individual. That's something which I've always seen. So if you have the right culture in your organization, if you have the right mindset in your organization, if people understand that there is an investment being made on individual, these individuals will start figuring out on their own in terms of how this could help the organization to move forward, right? I'll give a small practical example. In one of my performance review conversations, my manager said something saying that I see that you think systemically. You are a systems thinker. That's what I heard from a manager. Until that point in time, I didn't know what the systems thinking. So it's my own, the comfort and the general push my manager has given to me, and the investment scenario which is presented to me by the organization made me go a step further and figure out what is systems thinking. That led me to design thinking, understanding what is design thinking. That led me to figuring out who is the best person who is offering that program across the globe. So that eventually Stanford D School. So my organization sponsored me to go to Stanford and do this program and come back, right? So there is this investment, there is this regular conversation which happened with the manager, there is a small feedback which came in, there is my own understanding on what is changing in the landscape, going ahead, understanding how I could acquire this knowledge, come back and translate my acquired knowledge to the benefit of the organization. I did not stay long in that company, but the communication, comfort, and investment the organization made on me made me realize that I could just go ahead and pivot and start doing multiple things. I would say companies don't have to worry about it. As long as they create the environment, employees will figure it out.
Yes, thank you for that anecdote. Also, I'm sure everybody would take that as inspiration. Also, I feel like everything that you just spoke now, we discussed about it when we talked about spotting hidden talents. We said, company culture is very important. You have to talk about, you have to see who's this person who understands the ecosystem more. Like, just not my profile. I'm into marketing. I just don't have to restrict myself with the marketing of just my product, but I also have to understand research about market, how it is growing, what are the new trends coming up. Then I also have to take on new responsibilities, roles and responsibilities. Everything that you said would resonate and, has been concluded in that answer just you shared with us. So thank you so much, Mr. Babu, for that. I just have one question from my end, and then we will move to the audience Q&A. You did, share one anecdote, but just to maybe share another with our audience today. Succession planning is something that is isn't one size fits all solution. One model cannot be effective for all organizations. We have different values, we have different workforce, we have a different setting altogether. So any story that you can share with us that of a company, or in your experience, something that you adapted as a succession planning strategy, which helped the organization grow in terms of the rapidly changing industry dynamics.
There are a couple of things which comes to my mind. I'm not naming the organization. I can talk about a couple of things. In one, within our own HR vertical, was a huge HR team of about 150 individuals. A leadership in the HR team of about 8 or 9 of us. And of course, we had CHRO. We were all reporting to a CHRO. In this kind of a structure, supporting close to 9-10,000 employees. One of the things which we constantly did is, it was a new age industry. One of the things which we constantly did is, which was my job in terms of designing the organization, where we went out and started looking at competitive organization structures which are existing in the market, right? This I'm talking about the early age of WhatsApp, early age of any information available on internet. There's no concept of AI. So you really need to write to people, talk to them, meet them in conferences, or travel to multiple locations to understand what is the organization structure they practice and why they practice it. And so when we start looking at all of this, we figured out that there are certain jobs which requires you to be seated and think about developing for the future. There are certain jobs which are required you to run the everyday grind. There are certain jobs which is a mix of both, right? Until that point in time, the entire HR team, we were playing the game of supporting employees like a school football team, right? One goalpost, one football, your goal is to just go hit the ball, right? So there are about 150 of us running together in the same direction. I would equate it to, maybe it's an old movie, but if you look at Lagan, the first scene in the cricket is like when the ball is hit, everybody chases the ball to feet, right? It was something like that. But when we realized that there is differences which we can bring to the organization structure, most importantly, the org gave us the confidence told us that we have invested in you. You have the liberty to go to the world and figure out what different organization structures work. We went, figured out, came back and restructured the way we were functioning, right? When we restructured, I was handling a bigger group of about 3,000 employees. I have to let go what I was handling. It was a difficult one, but I have to let go what I was handling. And I moved into developing COEs, Centers of Excellence, for our own organization, right? It was one way, if I look back, the org gave me an opportunity to play 2 or 3 different roles within the same time period. The org told me that we have invested in you, you could go ahead and do lot many things. It was super long term. And when I look back, the next board meeting, these changes were discussed, right? That helped us to move in a very, very different direction because of this one exercise. And of course, there are multiple exercises. This was first of its kind. One of my team member, my colleague, not team member, colleague, moved on to become the CHRO of the organization, right? That helped very clearly to draft the path for most of us. So that's one thing I could immediately think about. I think to a larger extent, we applied it for our CEOs also, where we were sort of very clear that the CEO would run the organization for 2 years. At the end of 2 years, someone else will come and take it up. That someone else was found out 2 years back, right? So while the new CEO was operating, the other CEO was given different assignments and different functions. He moved around, no questions asked. Of course, he was held accountable for what he is supposed to deliver, did 3 different roles, and when 2-year tenure was over, he moved in to become the CEO for the organization. So that's another thing. Sorry, I couldn't name the company, but these are some things I could immediately recollect.
So I think that was really insightful, and it's like planning ahead. You start planning backwards. As you said, if the new CEO was just appointed, and we already had the new one that you'll appoint after 2 years. He had the enough time for preparing for his role, the skill set that he would require, the understanding of different kind of roles that he overlook when he becomes the CEO. So thank you for sharing that. I'm sure that helps everybody here. And this has been such an insightful discussion today. There is a lot that we have taken. I have taken, I have made my notes. I hope everybody in the audience also has. So we'll just quickly move to the audience questions also. Some of it, I think, most of it we have already discussed. Some came in before when we didn't have, discuss on. But let's take one by one, and we'll request you to help us with the responses. So the first question is from Vivekanandu. It's a very direct question. How to evaluate talent?
How to evaluate talent? From what perspective? Is it to onboard them onto a succession plan? I'm assuming, I think that's the perspective Vivek is talking about. It's what works for you is very simple and unique, and that works only for you. Don't go with what others are saying, that this is the template and this is what you need to follow. If you figured out there is a specific thing which works for you in an organization, you could go ahead and figure out, start strengthening it by adding a few more in terms of what you're learning from the ecosystem, but go with what works for you. That's something very, very simple. Tools is something you can rely on. You can look at the market as tons and tons of tools. You can rely on some of the tools to help assessing talent. All of these measures are to some extent, right? It's not going to help you complete the complete set of gamut. It's not available. Right? There are providers who tell you that succession plan do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I wouldn't suggest you to take that route, because end of the day, you need to speak the language what the CEO understands. So it's better to look at what works for you internally. If there are some tools, go and try the tool. Try the tool with short set of people. Don't expand it for everybody in the organization, because if it's not working, it's easy for you to switch, right? So these are some things I would recommend.
Sure, thank you. I hope that answers the question. Moving on to the next question, which we have. Vikas would want to know, what are the tools of succession planning? that you would recommend that organizations can use today?
What are the tools of succession planning?
Yes.
Done and dusted 9-box tool. That's something you can use to start with. Again, as I said in the beginning, it will be subjective when you make your first assessment because you're making it based on the observations. It will be subjective. There are some objective data which comes into picture. Try to formulate a 9-box, right? You will never get it right at the first attempt. Maybe you can be happy about it saying I got it right, but it will never be right. So try and formulate a 9-box. One of the things to understand is you will get it right in the second or third time, right? One of the things to understand in 9-box is it's sort of a roll of dice, right? The dice has just one on all the sides. There's no 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So an individual can move only from one box to the other. If you see somebody moving in, let's say from box 3 to box 7, most probably it's your assessment mistake. So it's not that the individual has skyrocketed. All of us will take time to move forward. I would say that if you could combine 9-box with Ram Charan's career ladder, the leadership pipeline, what Ram Charan has built in, these two are the fundamental tools to start with. Start with that. Once you become more familiar, there is obviously HBR, there is obviously Google. You can figure out other tools which will help you.
No, I'm sure that answers the question. Moving on to the next question, which is what kind of parameters need to be focused on in a succession plan template?
Keep it centered on the individual, right? Don't worry too much about the organization because a succession plan template starts with the individual. So if you can think about and start focusing more around the individual, and if the extension of a succession plan could be a development plan, helping the individual plan his or her career. I think these are the two key aspects I would say. One is focus it on the individual, two is on the development plan. But the entire plan will fail if you don't support the individual. It's easy to put a few things on a sheet and get it signed, review it once in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, but it will fail flat on your face if you do not support that individual. So maybe figure out a way to create a budget to support the individual in their growth. Budget is a difficult thing to crack, but figure out a way to create a budget for this. Your support is most important than any of this, what I told you before.
No, I'm sure we all would agree on that. Moving on to the next question from Praveen. Succession planning. If we identify a candidate and start to develop him and add skill set, everything, how to keep him motivated as it is a little longer process?
If you know the answer, tell me.
I would say
I'm asking Praveen. Don't worry.
Praveen.
I'm asking Praveen. If he knows the answer, he can tell us. I mean, it's difficult, right? Because there are a lot of distractions. There are a lot of noises which are happening across. You can make a sincere effort and you could tell the candidate or right now, I think the candidate has become an employee. You can tell the employee that you are making the right sincere efforts to ensure that succession planning is in place. One of the things is if you could start giving in more positive reinforcement to the individual, which is if you can showcase their achievement in some way or the other, right? Let the entire organization know that this individual is on the growth path. We are helping the individual. He or she has cracked a bigger problem and they have brought in, say, X% of revenue to the company. If there is some achievement you can showcase, right? If you put an individual in spotlight and let the organization look at them in a positive way, that sends a positive reinforcement. You don't have to spend so much money in terms of doing this. It comes naturally. Somebody feels really happy if they see themselves being celebrated in the organization, right? See if you can give that sense and make sure that your efforts are sincere. I think that's all I could say. The probability is around 50-60%, not more than that, because all of us get distracted by lot many things happening outside of our organization. So give this a try.
Sure, I think truer words honestly would have never been spoken before. When we talk about sincere effort, right? It's important that we make the person feel valued, we recognize their efforts. When it comes to monetary benefits, that always is a good motivator, but something which comes from within the heart, and there is no you feel valued, you're being recognized for the efforts, they will definitely feel more engaged, more motivated to work harder. So thank you, Mr. Babu, for that. Moving on to the next question from Mobin. Sometimes I think it's a little it's somewhat similar, but sometimes the successor may not have skills in all departments. Can training help in adding those skills, or should we keep on checking for an individual with all the skill set?
Keep on checking for an individual with all the skill sets. That's eternal. You will not find someone who has all the skill sets. It's okay. I mean, look at what matters the most, right? You don't have to think about someone who probably has, let's say, if the focus is on strategy, don't look at someone and look at whether they have an HR skill inbuilt or ingrained in their own DNA. I don't think that is something which is needed. I would say look for relevant skills, right? If you could look for relevant skills, that's more than enough. You'll get it 60-70% of the time. If you want to invest in terms of training, the challenge is the moment you say training, it will not be well received. I would say if you can find a coach for the individual, find a mentor for the individual internally, or you could look at shadowing one of the other leader who is performing. Those are few things you can do. Training helps, but training in a very different way. Training is largely seen as, in terms of succession planning, is largely seen as a punishment, right? That I've been put inside a training, I need to sit, I need to listen, may or may not work. I would say give them a coach, make it very, very personal. And this is one of the sincere efforts I'm talking about. Let it not be in the limelight that somebody is getting coached. Let them have it as their personal journey. That would definitely help.
Sure. I'm sure that would. Just have one last question. How do you identify competencies?
How do you identify competencies? That can be done through 9box. That's possible. We can also look at some of the other things you can look at is your own performance review process. You obviously have a performance review process, which if it is efforts based or results based. If it's efforts based, obviously you would have measured it based on competencies. So there are a few things which are available. You have your culture and value statements in the organization. You need to exhibit some amount of competencies to reach those specific values, right? So that's another way you can look at it. That's what I said in the beginning. We have everything with us. All the data is available with us, just that we choose not to look in that direction. This information is available. If it's not available anywhere, your job description is another place to go and look for competencies. If you have created it with all sincerity, the competencies are hidden in one of these places. There is, I forgot the name of it. There is a library of competencies which is available, about 117 competencies. It's available in one of the job sites. You can search for it. You'll find that. But all of this for academic purpose and conceptual understanding. What suits you is available in your own laptop. You can figure it out.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Babu. We have a couple of questions. If you have the time, we can quickly take them up, or we'll take them offline.
Sure.
Now? Okay.
Yeah.
Good, sure. So the question is, I think this is very relatable to all of us. The question is, so if I plan for a position and the existing person comes to know about it, he or she will get insecure or feel that his or her job is in danger. So how to work on this?
So if you plan for a succession plan, the incumbent would get upset. So that's the question we're talking about.
Yes.
They will be upset. I mean, you can't have everything served to you, right? It's super difficult. You will win some, you will lose some. Uh, The the odds are probably stacked against us if we don't structure it properly, right? It's so there is also the other challenge, right? Somebody keeps growing in the same role and the salary also keeps increasing for the individual, but you realize that the person cannot perform beyond this role, right? That's one blockage. The other blockage is you probably hired this person when you started the organization. He's probably jack of all trades. He or she has helped you to scale up to a greater extent. But today you see that there are better people, better players than this individual. He or she cannot grow further in the organization. Something similar to that is this particular question which came up. You will always face such challenges when you're developing a succession plan. So it's always better to keep a checklist in terms of what will you miss out when you implement a plan? Where will you get hit when you develop a plan like this? The biggest challenge is letting your CEO know that this is coming through. When we implement a plan, there are 10 advantages and 3 disadvantages. We actually don't reveal the disadvantages to our bosses. It's better to tell them upfront. So it reduces the impact on what we are trying to do. There are other ways we can figure out how we could ensure the individual grows. If the culture and values of that individual is super aligned with the organization, we can always find another role for the individual in the org, right? So there is always positions available. That should not be an issue. Let's be upfront, clear when we make the plan, look at what we will miss and communicate.
Sure. Communication remains the key. So I'll just take one last question. It's like, if you want to conclude, how to create a heat map for succession plan?
How to create a
heat map for succession plan.
Create a heat map for succession planning. Okay, so heat map can come in through either talent density. You look at where the talent is dense. Maybe that's an area where you don't have to create because there are tons of people who are already available. You don't need to worry about it. You look at places where the density is less, and that's one area you could focus on. A heat map can also help you in figuring out for a specific role. You don't need succession planning to come by. The creation of heat map depends on the data what you have on hand, right? There are objective ways in which there are performance data available, there are behavior data which is available, there's longevity which is available, need for the organization which is available, the way you can pivot in the company is available. There are tons of data which is available with you. What you create is your own heat map. And as I said in the earlier context also, you will get it wrong, right? So try a couple of iterations, then you will start improving on the heat map. You don't have to look for data from elsewhere. Fundamentals, there are 4 or 5 data points you're needed to create a heat map. Start there and also focus on areas where you don't need succession planning. It's easy to gather data around that place, and the first heat map will come out really well. You can start iterating and making it better.
Sure, I'm sure that answers the question. Thank you so much, Mr. Babu. It's been a pleasure having this discussion with you today. I see a lot of positive feedback from the audience as well in the comments. Arun Kumar ji has said, thanks, Babu. This session is very insightful. So, yeah, as we end the discussion today, thank you so much for joining us. As I said, it's been a great pleasure hosting you. This has been insightful, engaging, enlightening. There were a lot of key takeaways from this. And I hope as much as we enjoyed this discussion, you did as well.
Yeah, I had a lovely time. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for organizing such a session. I'm really, really happy for all the questions what I had. I hope we tried answering all your questions. Good luck and best wishes for all of you in the succession planning journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see again a few from Satish, Suraj. There's also an anonymous attendee insightful session, super insightful. So thank you so much, Mr. Babu. Also, can we have a slide, please? We'll quickly wrap it up by sharing. Yes. Thank you so much. So everybody, I think we did cover all the questions, but if you have any other questions, you can always connect with us on Great Tribe Community. It's a knowledge sharing platform. The link is there on your screen. You can sign up today, and any questions that you have related to HR or compliance, you can share your queries there, and we have HR experts, industry leaders there who can help us with your responses. So once again, thank you so very much, Mr. Babu, for joining us today. And to all the attendees who joined to make it more successful and all the engagement that we had on Q&A today. Thank you so very much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. Also, any other questions that you may have, please feel free to write to rakhigotham@creative.com and we will get back to you. And as promised earlier, the recording will be shared with you soon and will be available on Great HR YouTube channel. So thank you so much once again, everybody, for joining us today. Until next time.